You're standing in a kitchen. You want to boil an egg for exactly 60 seconds. So you pull out your phone, tap the timer, and watch the little numbers count down. Easy. Now take that same task, 60 seconds, no more, no less, and hand it to someone 4,000 years ago. Here's a question that sounds almost too simple to bother asking, until you actually try to answer it. How did ancient humans measure a second? Seriously, sit with that for a moment. Not an hour, not a day, a single second. The tick between one heartbeat and the next. We treat it as the most basic slice of time there is, the thing every clock is built to count, so surely people have always been able to measure one, right? Wrong. And the real answer is so strange it loops all the way back around to something sitting inside your own chest right now. This goes back further than you think. Further than the pendulum clock. Further than the mechanical gear. Further than Rome. Further than writing itself in some cases. And the deeper you dig, the more you realize the thing you take for granted, that crisp, reliable 1-second tick, is one of the youngest inventions humans have. The units of a day, a month, a year, ancient. Older than farming, older than cities. But the second is practically a newborn, and the strangest part is what people used instead. Before you can measure a second, you need something that changes at a steady, repeatable rate. Something you can count. Think about what that actually requires. You need a heartbeat of the universe, some rhythm that never speeds up and never slows down, so that every tick is exactly like the last. Look around the ancient world and try to find one. The sun? It crawls across the sky, but it's useless the moment a cloud rolls in. Useless at night, and it moves far too slowly to chop into anything small. The stars? Same problem. Grand and slow. A shadow creeping across the ground gives you the rough hour. It gives you nothing close to a second. Picture the world these people lived in. No ticking anywhere. No hum of electricity. The fastest reliable rhythm most humans ever heard was the drip of water, the drop of sand, or the sound of their own breathing in the dark. That was the toolkit. That was everything. And then, somewhere, someone tried to cut time into smaller and smaller pieces anyway. Start with the people who got furthest with the raw numbers, the Babylonians. Around 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia, they inherited a counting system from the Sumerians built not on 10, but on 60, base 60. It sounds bizarre until you see why it's brilliant. 60 can be split cleanly into halves, thirds, quarters, fifths, sixths, 12 different ways in total. It's a number practically engineered for slicing things up. So, when the Babylonians carved up the sky and the day, they did it in 60s. And here's the part that should stop you cold. That decision is still running your life. 60 seconds in a minute. 60 minutes in an hour. 360 degrees in a circle. Every time you glance at a clock, you're reading a 4,000-year-old number system that refuses to die. Read that again. The reason there are 60 seconds in a minute is a choice made by people who never once measured a second, because that's the twist. The Babylonians had the math for tiny divisions. What they didn't have was any tool on Earth that could actually catch one. The idea of the second existed in the mind long before it existed in any machine. And that gap between what people could imagine and what they could measure is the whole story of this video. But here's where it gets stranger. Most people assume the second came right after the minute, like a natural next step. It didn't. For most of human history, the smallest unit anyone bothered to measure was the hour, and even that was a mess. The ancient Egyptians around 1500 BC built water clocks. The Greeks later called them klepsydros, which literally means water thief. A stone or clay vessel with a tiny hole in the bottom, filled with water, marked with lines inside. As the water drained out, the falling level told you roughly how much of the night had passed. An official named Amenhotep, who lived around 1500 BC, is actually named in his own tomb as an inventor of one. A real person with a real name who built one of humanity's first attempts to measure time indoors at night when the sun was no help at all. And it worked, sort of. It could tell you an hour. On a good night, maybe a fraction of one. But a second? Water doesn't trick that cleanly. The flow speeds up when the vessel's full and slows as it empties. These were the finest timekeepers on the planet for centuries, and they still couldn't reliably catch anything close to the tick we're chasing. Movies love to show ancient people as either primitive grunts or secret super geniuses. The truth is quieter and more human. They were smart enough to know the second should exist. They just didn't have the machinery to hold it in their hands. Organic material rots in centuries, and even stone water clocks wear down. So when we can't find perfect evidence of how fine they could measure, that absence isn't proof they didn't try. It's proof of how hard the problem was. So what do you do if you're an ancient astronomer who needs to measure a short, exact stretch of time and every tool you have is too clumsy? You reach for the one clock you were born with, your own body. And this is where it gets beautiful. In ancient India, the astronomers writing the Surya Siddhanta, one of the great foundational texts of Hindu astronomy, faced this exact wall. They needed a small, reliable, repeatable unit. And they landed on something you're doing right now without thinking about it. Breathing. Their base unit of practical time was the prana, one respiration. One calm, steady breath, in and out. And they defined it with startling precision, the time it takes to pronounce 10 long syllables. In modern terms, one prana works out to about 4 seconds. 6 pranas made of the nadi, about 24 seconds. 60 of those made a nadi, about 24 minutes. A whole system of timekeeping built up from the rhythm of a human breath. Think about what that means. They didn't have a device that ticked, so they became the device. The closest thing the ancient world had to a stopwatch was a person, sitting still, breathing slowly, counting. You're telling me the ancient standard for a few seconds was one breath? Yes, it was. And it makes perfect sense the moment you try it. A calm breath is remarkably consistent. It's portable. It works in the dark, underground, in a cave, anywhere. Every human carries one. It was the wristwatch nobody had to build. We touched on the Babylonians and their 60s a moment ago, but here's where the two worlds rhyme in a way that gives me chills. The Indian system also ran on 60-60 vanadis to a nadi, 60 nadis to a day. Two civilizations and the same instinct take the day and keep dividing it down by 60, down toward that impossibly small tick they could feel coming but couldn't quite reach. And some of them reached anyway, on paper. There's one last layer, and I saved it for the end, because it's the strangest part of all of this. That same ancient Indian text didn't stop at the breath. It kept dividing, downward, into units no human could ever hope to observe. It describes the nimesha, the time of a single blink. It goes smaller to the tatpara. And then it names the smallest unit of all, the truti. One truti is about 29 microseconds. To put that in plain numbers, it's roughly 1/33,000th of a single second. A stretch of time so short that nothing in the ancient world, no clock, no water, no sand, no blink, no breath, could come within a universe of measuring it. They had no tool that could catch it. They had no way to prove it. They simply reasoned that time must keep going, smaller and smaller, past the point where the body could follow, and they gave that impossibly thin sliver a name, more than 1,000 years before any machine existed that could measure anything remotely that small. Let that sink in. People who told time by breathing sat down and conceived of a unit 29 millionths of a second long. The imagination ran 1,000 years ahead of the instruments. And the second, our humble, everyday second, sat somewhere in the middle of that vast ladder, still just out of reach of every tool they had. So, how did ancient humans measure a second? The honest answer is, for the most part, they couldn't. Not the way you can. The clean, reliable 1-second tick you get from a phone or a wristwatch didn't truly arrive until the pendulum clock in the 1600s, which means the second, as a thing you can actually measure, is younger than the telescope. Younger than Shakespeare. For all those thousands of years before, people did something far more human than measuring. They approximated. They counted their breaths. They watched waterfall and sand slip and shadows crawl. They took the one steady rhythm they were each born with, and they trusted it. And in India, they dreamed the ladder of time all the way down to the microsecond, long before anyone could climb it. They inherited a number. They built the water thief. They breathed and counted and named the unnameable. The second wasn't measured by ancient humans. It was felt one breath at a time and imagined, reaching down into a smallness they'd never lived to see confirmed. So the next time you set a timer for 60 seconds and watch those numbers fall, remember what people did before that little screen existed. They put a hand on their own chest. They breathed in, slow and even. And they counted the only clock they'd ever truly owned. It's still in there. Right now. Ticking, you're the clock.